1460 WVOX.
Now, live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenburgh Report, with Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, my name's Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and we are very fortunate today to have a special guest, Catherine Ludden. And Catherine is someone who has done a tremendous amount of great things for the town. She's been involved with the Greenburgh Nature Center, has been promoting pollinator gardens, and if you like the Greenburgh Nature Center, you really have Catherine to thank, because it wouldn't be as great without her. So, Catherine, thanks so much for being here, and also thank you very much for all you've done for the town and for the Nature Center. You really don't get the recognition that you deserve, but you've done a tremendous amount. Could you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
I retired from Wall Street. I was a securities litigator and retired almost, over 15 years ago now, and was looking for something to do with my interest in plants and ecology and nature centers. So really, since retiring, I have spent most of my time working with nonprofits, mostly in the environmental area. And probably about 12 years ago or so, I got involved with the campaign here in Greenburgh to stop sending leaves off of property, the Leave Leaves Alone leaf mulching program. And through that, I was introduced to some people at the Greenburgh Nature Center who were sort of spearheading some education in that area, and got to be very interested in the Nature Center back then. And
could you tell, when people think, there's somebody who gives donations to the Nature Center, sometimes it could be a few $100s or $1,000, but you've given substantial, dollars. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that you've helped fund?
Well, the first thing I got interested in and excited about was there's a stretch of land that runs right along Central Avenue that's part of the Nature Center's property, and it's bordered by a thin row of trees. Otherwise, it's really right on the heavy traffic aisle of Central Avenue. But it's flat and sunny, and there were not a lot of trees in the middle part of it, and so I thought it looked like a meadow or a future meadow. So I've been interested in restoring landscapes for the benefit of birds, bees, butterflies, small mammals, just trying to bring nature back to areas that have been degraded. And so my first project really was to turn that area into a wildflower meadow, which we did. So I worked with a landscape designer named Bill Boyce, who volunteered his time very generously, and he put together a design for the meadow. And in the winter of 2014, we got help from Larry Weiner, who's an expert in meadow design and cultivation in the northeastern United States. And Larry formulated a seed mix for us. And so we laid out the trails and the beds, and we seeded the meadow so that by the spring of 2015, it was starting to grow. And today, a glorious place that I hope all of your listeners will visit.
That's great. So the Greenburgh Nature Center is located on Dromore Road off of Central Avenue. So if you're driving on Central Avenue and you say, this is so ugly, the whole strip, and you just make a right turn, you really feel you're in paradise.
Absolutely. And when you stand in the meadow, it's just almost impossible to believe that you're only yards away from Central Avenue. It's quiet, it's lush, it's loaded with bird life. Butterflies are flitting around, bees are visiting the flowers there. We have active honeybee hives. It's just, it's a magical place, just right off this commercial district. It's kind of unbelievable.
And you've also supported a pollinator garden there.
Yes, just last summer, really in June of last summer, the Irvington Garden Club and family and friends of a member of the garden club who had passed away the year before donated money, and we planned a pollinator garden in memory of Jerry Shapiro, who was a member of the garden club, who was somebody who was very interested in public gardens. She actually designed a space at Hartsbrook that is still there, the meditation path at Hartsbrook. So Jerry was a wonderful human being and a really good landscape designer. So we planted a pollinator garden in her honor.
We have to take a break, and then we'll be right back in 5 minutes. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and my guest is Catherine Ludden. And Catherine is someone who has really given a lot to the Greenburgh Nature Center and has been a big environmentalist for the town of Greenburgh. I'm Paul Feiner.
Now, back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. My guest is Catherine Ludden, who has done an awful lot for the Greenburgh Nature Center and for the town of Greenburgh. And Catherine, before the break, we started talking about pollinator gardens. Could you tell us, and the Greenburgh Nature Center was one of the first in the area to have a pollinator garden. Could you tell us why a pollinator garden is so important?
Sure. I think a lot of people have been reading and hearing about the threats to pollinators and how critical that is to our food supply, among other things. A really substantial percentage of our food crops need insect pollination, which is primarily bees. And not just the honeybees, which are commercially brought in by beekeepers and settled down in a field, for example, to pollinate crops. We really depend more than on the honeybees, we depend on our native bees. And native bees need food resources and they need places to nest. They don't live in big hives like honeybees do. They live mostly in the ground or in smaller communities. So they need flowers, they need native plants, and they need nest areas that are undisturbed habitat. So as we provide pollinator gardens, we hope to provide a couple of things. Plants that butterfly caterpillars can eat, the host plants, and then native flowers that supply nectar and pollen that is needed by our native bees, and a place where other insects that are leaf-eating insects or pollen-eating insects can find the resources they need. So pollinator gardens are really important, not just for aesthetics. They are beautiful, but we really are supporting the populations that ultimately support us.
And do you think the town should require pollinator gardening, say, in the town parks? And should we be doing more than we're doing?
I don't know that it should be a requirement because it takes a little bit of knowledge and it takes some effort to maintain any garden. And so I would hope that people decide they want to have pollinator gardens because they're more interesting to look at than lawn or rows of non-native evergreen shrubs. Flowers are beautiful and everybody enjoys them. And that people would feel a sense of connection to nature by planting a pollinator garden, which can just be a corner of your front lawn.
I was thinking of for town parks.
Yes, town parks too. Obviously, any place that's good for lawn could be a pollinator garden.
And a pollinator garden is easier to maintain, isn't it?
It can be. I mean, in the first instance, you have to plant it and water it for the first some number of weeks as the roots get established and keep it weeded. But after a season or two, after it gets established, all you really need to do for most of these gardens is just cut them down in the spring before the new shoots start emerging from the ground. So they should require no fertilization, no extra water, and no real care other than mowing in the spring.
That's great. So if somebody is interested in pollinator gardens, you could take a look at the Greenburgh Nature Center. They have a beautiful pollinator garden. And in Greenburgh, we have some volunteers who just created a pollinator garden at Hartsbrook Nature Preserve and also at Anthony Veteran Park. So there's a group all over Westchester that is promoting pollinator gardens, but yours was one of the first.
And certainly in Greenburgh, we have a very active group in Hastings, a really good group in Dobbs Ferry that has planted a pollinator garden along the Dobbs Ferry riverfront. And in Irvington, there are multiple pollinator gardens. Actually, on the Greenburgh Nature Center website, last week we published sort of a how-to in my blog on how we made the pollinator garden at the Nature Center, which shows how we laid it out, how we installed the plants, and has links to the plant list that we actually used there. So anyone who's looking for the kinds of plants that are good for pollinator gardens, in that they are drought resistant, sun-loving, deer, rabbit, and woodchuck resistant, can find a list of the plants that work in those circumstances right on our website.
Could you tell us a little bit about your blog?
Sure. I've started writing a weekly blog. I think we started it last fall.
And what's the link?
It's on greenburghnaturecenter.org. Right on our homepage, there's always a featured photo that links to the blog. The blog is called Around the Grounds, and we talk about native plants, native plant gardening, and the relationship between plants and the environment. And the hope is that it will encourage people to try some of these native plants in their own yards, and that they will learn something about them. The blog is aimed at people who are both completely new to flower gardening or native plants, but also hopefully provide some interesting information each week for people who are at a much more knowledgeable level about native plants as well.
That is great. So the last headline was Billy Goat or Nanny Goat. Could you
Yes.
tell us about that?
Yes, there's a great plant for shade that's one of our favorites. Grows 4 feet tall or a little bit more, but will survive well in deep shade. Makes big, showy white blooms, and it's called goat's beard. The scientific name is Aruncus dioicus, and it's one of the few sort of garden perennials that has both male and female plants. And so that's what the title Billy Goat or Nanny Goat was to indicate that this plant can be either male or female, which is sort of unusual.
And before that, you have something called The Trouble with Double.
Yes. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a blog post talking about double flowers. When you have a simple flower that has all of its pollen and nectar visible and available, it's more beneficial to bees and other pollinators than if you have a very complex double flower like most tea roses or hybrid roses that no longer have any pollen or nectar in them because the extra petals have been sort of genetically selected to come from where the pollen should be.
Great. We have to take another break. This is a little shorter. I'm Paul Feiner, and my guest is Catherine Ludden. And Catherine is involved with the Nature Center, has her own blog that you could read about on the Nature Center website. And I'd like to encourage everybody to visit the Greenburgh Nature Center if you haven't, because it really is the closest thing to heaven on Central Avenue. And it's just spectacular. And you're really missing something if you don't.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and guest is Catherine Ludden. And Catherine has been very involved with the Greenburgh Nature Center. Has done amazing things and has also supported the Nature Center and provided real leadership, helping them become one of the best centers of its kind in the whole region. There's been a shift in the direction of the Nature Center. And could you tell us a little bit about what's happening at the Nature Center and why the Greenburgh Nature Center, when I grew up, is not the same Nature Center today?
That's a good way to put it. I think many people in the community, certainly A lot of people that I've met say, oh, the Nature Center is such a wonderful place. I used to take my kids there, but they haven't been there maybe in a decade or more. And we want to change that. I think in addition to being a wonderful place for families with young children, we want to be, and are becoming quickly, more of a resource for the whole community. As I mentioned before, having information on the website to help people plant pollinator gardens in their front yards, having a blog weekly that talks about native plants and their importance to the landscape. Those are things that are, of course, aimed at adults. And we want to expand our reach and are expanding our reach to become more of a force for environmental change, conservation, activism within the broader community. We want to offer more for adult education. Right now, we're on our second season of having college age or recent college graduate interns at the Nature Center, where these are paid internships where they are doing work on the grounds to really enhance our stewardship of the 33 acres that we have at the Greenburgh Nature Center by removing invasive plants, planting native plants, and taking care of that landscape. At the same time, these young people, most of whom are studying conservation, environmental sciences, land management, biology, botany. These are our young interns, and they're getting hands-on experience and an opportunity for research while they're at the Nature Center. So they're undertaking different scientific projects during the course of their internship, which hopefully can result in something useful to them, if nothing more than for their resumes, but maybe for research papers or school-related projects as well. So the internships are intended to give us help on the grounds and also to advance the scientific and environmental careers of these really talented and brilliant young people.
That is, that is great because, and even when you're talking about the direction of the Nature Center, how you're trying now to focus on education and attract older people to the Nature Center is important because when I think of the Nature Center, I think of the Halloween events. I think of the pumpkin,
Sure.
Efforts every year. I think of little children petting the animals, the turtles,
Sure.
and I think that one of the problems with the Nature Center in the past was that everybody loved it when their kids until the kids are about 8 or 9 years old, and when they get older, then they don't show up again. So you're trying to make it a center that everybody will appreciate.
Exactly. We don't want people to age out. We don't want families to age out at the Nature Center any longer. So actually, over the last 2 weekends, we had this fantastic event called Run Wild, where we set up an obstacle course over the Great Lawn and through the meadow and through the woods where kids of different ages could come and participate and run about a mile course with parents or without. And that has, I think, brought a lot of new people into the Nature Center, people who weren't aware of us before, who just had a fantastic time. We've started having spring and fall festivals that bring in vendors who have various sustainable products and information for families and households that are applicable to adults as well. So we are expanding our reach and expanding our message in a way that it's very exciting to me, so that we're not just for toddlers anymore, and we're not just a sleepy little nature center with animals for petting. We are a force for environmental action and conservation within the broader community.
And I guess you're like a perfect example because you got involved because of the composting effort. And if we hadn't been promoting the composting at that time, you might have been donating your time and efforts to another cause.
Exactly right. My children were already grown and out of the house when I first really got involved with the Nature Center. And I think we had taken them over when they were younger, but we really hadn't been involved in the Nature Center significantly. And it was the leave leaves alone, the leaf composting and food scrap composting program that drew my attention to the Nature Center. And now I'm just finishing my 10th year on the board there, and we have term limits, so I will be going off the board at the end of this year. But my time at the Nature Center has been all about the broader environmental efforts and conservation efforts to outreach to adults and older kids, and as I've said, college kids who are now interning at the Nature Center.
Do you feel that the composting efforts, because there was a lot of attention, a number of years ago, but it sort of has died down. Do you feel that enough people are composting? And I mean, is that something that I should be focusing more attention on again?
Well, we've talked about the food scrap recycling program or food scrap composting, which is ongoing, and the Nature Center staff has continued to lead composting efforts and waste reduction efforts at a number of the area schools. We have worked with businesses also on waste reduction. And although I think the pandemic put a sort of a pause on some of these things for the past couple of years, they're up and running again. So I think that is a focus for the future. I think the leaf composting thing, to me, it was just crazy to think that Westchester County was paying to ship what was essentially valuable compost out of the county, and the mess that was created on the curbs of having leaf piles there was just a waste, when leaves are really optimal compost and mulch material. So I think as people start to understand that and live a little bit more in harmony with nature, that's a plus for all of us, and that's part of what the Nature Center's mission is.
That is great. Are you also promoting general recycling, and are there new initiatives that you're working on?
Absolutely. One of our main focuses at the Nature Center is on sustainability. We have several of our staff members whose job is working on various sustainability efforts, and they're doing everything from plastic reduction, encouraging people to live the way we lived probably when I was a kid instead of the way most of us do now, using plastic in enormous quantities in our daily lives. And so the staff has worked in education programs for overall waste reduction, and particularly in reducing food waste and use of single-use plastics.
I remember the Nature Center came up with a capital plan a number of years ago, and or a master plan, I'm sorry. And I'm wondering how do you anticipate the Nature Center will look, say, 10 years from now? How different will it be in terms of the look?
Physically at the space. I think you will find an enormous change in the grounds, which has been my primary passion. We have 33 acres there, which looks the way most of the forested or wooded areas around us in southern Westchester County look. That is to say, there's a huge amount of invasive plants overrunning the forest. Ivy is our biggest problem at the Nature Center. Maybe a lot of homeowners don't realize that ivy is a very dangerous invasive plant. But at the Nature Center, it's really one of our biggest problems. So right now, for example, this year, the interns have been doing ivy control initiatives at the Nature Center. And by gradually converting areas of the property from invasive infested mess to nature and native plant habitats, I think that makes a significant change. And I'm hoping that a few years from now, if you try to walk through our wooded areas on the forest trails, you'll see what forests in this part of the world did look like, should look like, and hopefully will again.
Right. Could you tell us a little bit about the walking trails at the Nature Center, because it really is beautiful?
Yes, and they go throughout the property. Most of them are very accessible to people who feel like they can walk a mile, mile and a half, and the terrain is not terribly difficult. So our trails are great for people of all ages and ability levels, and there's education all along the way. If you walk past our vernal pond, for example, there's the frog pond where you can see turtles and salamanders and all sorts of water adapted plants. And then the meadow, of course, has a completely different open prairie look to it. So you can see several different types of ecosystems right on the Nature Center grounds.
We have to take another break, and we'll be right back. And we're talking Catherine Ludden, and we're talking with her about the Greenburgh Nature Center and her passion for the environment and for environmental causes. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. My guest is Catherine Ludden, and Catherine is very involved with the Greenburgh Nature Center as a volunteer and has donated her time, efforts, money to the Nature Center, really making the Nature Center a much nicer place and a location that people of all ages should really make a destination point. And I just wanted to mention, if you're not familiar with the Greenburgh Nature Center and you want to, this weekend, if you're looking for something to do, just look at greenburghnaturecenter.org. It's a great website, and it talks about many of the things that the Nature Center offers. And, a lot of people, when they think of a nature center, they think maybe trails, but this nature center has lots of additional things. What's a Native American site?
Oh, some years ago, one of our most talented staff members, Travis Brady, had the idea of having a program that would be available to the local schools who had units on Native American culture, habits, how they lived with the land. And we had a donor who contributed the funds to build a Native American longhouse and a Native American wigwam. And both of those things were constructed using the traditional original methodology and materials that the Native peoples who lived on this land right here in Greenburgh used when they were here. And so we have a Native American longhouse that you can visit, and there's a handmade dugout canoe in there. We have programs where schools come in with groups and families can come in with groups to see how those buildings were used and how the Native peoples lived with what plants and animals and resources were available here. But we also have a whole bunch of other things that you can see. If you came to the Nature Center this weekend, you could see our Birds of Prey exhibit, where we have a couple of bald eagles who were rescued and could not live in the wild now, but live at the Nature Center, which is the only opportunity that many of us will have to see a bald eagle up close, and they are impressive. And we have a red-tailed hawk that's also a rescue, and several different owls. Upstairs in the Manor House, we have animal exhibits of reptiles and small mammals, snakes that the kids can hold. And it's interesting to them to see these animals up close and learn that snakes are not cold and slimy, they're smooth and dry, that kind of thing. So we have that. We have the trails to the vernal pond. Homeowners can look at the landscaping around the 100-year-old manor house to get ideas for how to use native plants in a home landscaping. The pollinator garden and meadow, of course, we've talked about, offer great opportunities for bird watching and for seeing some butterflies you might not see in your neighborhood.
Right. Are there maps if somebody is a first time?
Yes, absolutely. Maps are available on the grounds at various kiosks on the website and at the Manor House. And all of our trails are marked so that it's very easy to navigate the trails without getting lost. They're all color-coded.
If somebody is disabled, is the Nature Center disabled accessible?
Parts of it are and parts of it are not. Because it's a 100-year-old building, we have not been able to make it fully ADA compliant. But there is plenty on the grounds that can be accessed by people with limited mobility. And that's something that I hope we can improve further in the future.
One of the things that I'm sort of proud of is a number of years ago, the town funded a playground there.
I can't believe I didn't think of it first thing. You're absolutely right. The playground at the Nature Center is charming, and it is just it's a wonderful place for kids. It's done in a naturalistic style, but there's plenty of things to climb, swing on, spin around on, and it's a huge draw for us. And of course, it's free of charge. The playground is accessed every day by families with young children, and kids love the place.
You know, it's amazing because when the Nature Center first proposed the idea, I thought it was just going to be another playground, but it's used by so many people, and it really is one of the better playgrounds in the county, I think.
I think so too, and it's not the only thing there. So kids can come and play on the playground for a while, climb and run around there, and then move around to our barnyard and see goats and chickens and sheep, and visit the animal museum and the manor house. We have some other birds besides the birds of prey. There's the famous Zhao, who is a corvid. It's in the crow family. We have a separate exhibit for that amazing creature. And so it's not just the playground. When your kids are tired of running around the playground, there's so much more to do.
Right, and you even have a camp.
We have a camp program. So especially now coming out of COVID, so many families are excited about the opportunity to be outside. Kids need to be outside and active. If you go onto our website, greenburghnaturecenter.org, you will see right away the camp programs, day camp, available for different age groups with the activities. And I think one of the things that makes our camp so incredibly special is the quality of our staff. Many of the people who run our camp programs are people who have degrees in nature education. Some of them have advanced degrees in nature education. And those are the people who will be teaching, not just supervising kids in camp activities, but teaching.
That is, that is great. How expensive is it to visit the Nature Center, or how do you become a member?
Our membership is available at several different levels. We do charge admission just to go into the Animal Museum at the Manor House, but the grounds are free and open to everybody. So the Birds of Prey, the Native American Center, the barnyard, the playground, and the trails are all free of charge and open to the public. Our camp programs, I think, are modestly priced, and if you go on the website and look at the top of the website, I think the fees for the camp programs are listed there.
And I should mention that if somebody has an animal, the Nature Center does not take animals from as donations.
We will advise people. People find injured animals, little birds that fall out of nests, a baby squirrel, and our advice generally is to leave them where you find them. Sometimes the human interference is actually a negative for the animal. The parents will come back and help the animal. We can give advice on injured animals, but we can't take them onto the property as part of our collection or rehab facility now.
And it should mention that the trails are not stroller friendly, but if somebody has a stroller, they could use. There's areas around the nature center that they could
Sure.
enjoy
Sure.
using the stroller.
The areas around the playground and the barnyard are fine with strollers, and you can always leave a stroller in the manor house if you want to head out on the trails. The trails, for the most part, are covered in wood chips, so it's not great for strollers and not for wheelchairs, but the parts of the grounds around the manor house are fine for strollers.
If somebody is interested in getting involved, like you have been, are there openings on the board? And are you looking for people to get involved in working on policy?
There are volunteer opportunities for adults and children at the Nature Center, and you can register your interest in volunteering on the website or by coming by the Manor House or by calling. The opportunities for contributions are always there, and we welcome them. And I think it's important for people to know, although Paul is here and the town of Greenburgh is a major benefactor for the Nature Center, about 75 to 80% of our budget is entirely self-funded, funded through contributions from the public or from our own programs, revenue generated from our own programs. But we are not, by any stretch, 100% supported by public funds. The town provides between 25 and 30% of our current budget.
And I guess we own the grounds.
Yes, yes. The building and the manor house and the grounds are owned by the town of Greenburgh. Although we've been doing a lot of the maintenance there of the new plantings, the town certainly has provided care of the trees and lawns and snow plowing and path shoveling and all of that.
And then we fixed
so
up
it's
the
quite
manor
a partnership.
house about a year ago, right?
Yes. We had a new roof and new siding on the manor house that was a result of a capital investment by the town, which has made the building, and new windows and window fittings, which has made the building far more energy efficient and comfortable for everyone, visitors and staff. So our partnership with the town is just critical to the success of the whole operation.
Great. So thank you so much. We're running out of time, and we're very lucky to, the Nature Center and the town's very lucky to have you. And you've been a great asset to the Nature Center and to the town, and glad you live here rather than in another state or another town.
It's been a pleasure. It's a labor of love.
Great. So I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor. I'll speak to everybody next week. Thanks.